Hey, this is Craig Finn. Welcome, Talkhouse listeners. Josh and Talkhouse just asked me to pick my favorite episode of the podcast. That's how I remember it. It wasn't easy. We're in the middle of season 2 now. I've had so many great guests, but after a lot of deliberation, I'm going to say my favorite episode is with guest John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, which ran back in July 2022. I picked this episode for 2 reasons. First off, John is a brilliant mind and a great talker. I love hearing him speak on anything. John's a great storyteller and just overall downright entertaining. In this episode, we talked a lot about his novel Devil House, which I loved. And I got a little insight into that book as well as the last Mountain Goats record, which I compared within the episode to the Cro-Mags record, Age of Quarrel, which might be a stretch, but you'll see. I also chose this one because my own podcast is about memory, and I just had a few cool memories of John. We got in touch, him and I, for the first time as mutual admirers. It was just after I moved to New York in 2000. Through that, he ended up opening for a reunion show for my band Lifter Puller, a reunion show we played in 2002. And then I started the Hold Steady a couple years later, and about 2005, we together were the subject of a New Yorker profile that connected us as lyricists. We sat for photos together at a New Yorker photo shoot. Really amazing afternoon. Now, about a year later, I remember being on the lawn of Water Music, a recording studio in Hoboken, New Jersey. I was running an album title by him for the next Hold Steady record. I said, "Boys and Girls in America, what do you think?" He said that sounded really cool. We went with it. Meanwhile, his own band got bigger over the years in all senses. Bigger shows, bigger records, bigger sound. And in this case, by bigger, I mean more and more awesome. The Mountain Goats have become a rock and roll juggernaut, and I am still a maniacal fan. I listen to every record on release day, and John's lyricism still thrills me, floors me, and every once in a while brings me to tears. So enjoy this episode. And if you're up for it, join John and I at some upcoming shows that the Hold Steady and the Mountain Goats are playing together. These will be amazing. July 3rd, Saturday, July 3rd, at Stubbs in Austin, Texas. And June 30 and July 1st, 2 shows at the Salt Shed in Chicago. The Chicago shows also feature Dillinger 4. That is going to be massive. Meanwhile, come on over to my place and check out That's How I Remember It. I've had a ton of great guests come in and speak to me about the relationship between memory and creativity in their own work. It's fun. I'm serious. But now, here is my favorite episode, John Darnielle on That's How I Remember It. Hey, I'm Craig Finn. I recently put out a record called A Legacy of Rentals. It's a record about memory, how we remember friends that are gone, places that have changed, major events that are part of our past. These songs are memorials, incantations, affirmations, legends, and prayers. Like all stories, they're subject to the imperfection and limitations of memory. The distortion happens to our own histories when stretched by time and distance. These small adjustments become part of the stories themselves. I decided to create a podcast called That's How I Remember It, which examines the connection between memory and creativity. Each episode features a discussion between myself and one creator about the role that memory plays in their art. These conversations will reveal the different way that each creator synthesizes their remembered life experience to tell stories about themselves and the world we live in. As a guest, I have my friend and brilliant and prolific songwriter and author, John Darnielle. John has been making music as the Mountain Goats since, I believe, 1991, and has released countless albums which contain some of my very favorite songs. Originally the sole member of a lo-fi bedroom project, the Mountain Goats have grown into a lush rock and roll juggernaut, as we'll see on their new record, Bleed Out, which comes out later this summer in August. In addition, John has become an acclaimed author of 4 books. The most recent, Devil House, was a New York Times bestseller, and I am honored and proud to have John Darnielle joining us here on That's How I Remember It.
The history's rewritten when the memories get meddled with. The way that I remember it.
John, thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, it's a pleasure to see you, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'll start how I start with everyone. Do you consider yourself to have a good memory?
For me, it's a complicated question because I used to say I had a bad memory, and I've had people in my life say, it's not a bad memory, but it's a weird memory. Like people who are inclined to be uncharitable will say I have a selective memory and it's good when I want it to be, but I know that's not really true. But sometimes it's very bad, right? Sometimes it just doesn't, I can't call stuff up. And then I will have a remarkable memory for tiny details from a million years ago. So I have an oddly functioning memory, which when I was in therapy for a long time, I learned that a lot of people who've had the sorts of experiences that I had as a child and adolescent, it does weird things to your memory like that. Like the way you remember things and this profound recall for some things and total erasure of other things. That's a dynamic that's common in people like me.
Do you think it helps you as a songwriter, as an author?
Well, I mean, I know actually that I've been thinking about memory as a subject since the earliest days of the Mountain Goats. Right there, if you listen to the early songs, there are a million of them with the word memory in it. Like there's in the first Ajax single has a song called "Alphabetizing," right? Where the climactic line is like, "Yet let the years come and take away my memory. I will not forget the shock that ran through me when I saw you," et cetera, et cetera. It was an obsessive topic for me in the early years of the Mountain Goats. All my characters were always obsessing about what they would or would not remember and using their memory as a weapon sometimes and saying, which I think, I mean, it's such a vital question, especially after the Holocaust, right? You talk about remembering things so that they don't happen again. And that's a very living question, is whether that, how that works, if that works. So it's something I was thinking about from the very earliest days of the band.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it helps more with sort of the big parts of the stories or the small details?
I think it's more, it's a presence, because everybody in your story, like if you are telling a story in song or something, your characters also have memories, and it's unlikely that they have perfect memories. Like it is an aspect of their existence is what they choose to remember. And one thing about memory is that it's not like the memory we have in our computers, which just has all the data right there, right? Memory always frames, always narrates, right? Always sort of tells a story, right? Computer memory does not tell a story. It's just data, right? We are not actually computers. We like to consider the hard drive is like the brain of the computer, but it's not at all. The brain has all kinds of agendas,
Sure.
So I mean, I think at one level, having a memory, a sharp, a sense of what details can do and what they can mean and how they can illuminate a story, that's part of it. But also understanding that, like, the way you remember things and where your focus lands is an important aspect of how you tell your stories.
Yeah, I always feel like the memories, even when I'm writing something that's completely fictitious, ends up populating the details, Like, I'm not a car guy, so if I need a car name, it's like the last car I got into. Oh, it's a Nissan Altima, because that's, the Uber came and said, look for a Nissan Altima. And that ends up in my song, because I know it's a car, but I don't know how to think about cars,
That's funny, because you're such a detailed guy, right? I think about Fiestas and Fiascos is just so loaded with very specific details about what drinks and and what people are wearing and so on and so forth. For me, actually, though, with cars, it's funny. I have a dynamic where Peter is a car guy, big car guy, right? And so if I name a car, like sometimes I'll seek some help from him, but then if I really want to have fun, I'll pick one and hope that he will see me and go, oh, perfect. I think when I picked a Grand Am in the Grey King on Goths, I was like, I bet you Peter's going to like the Grand Am. So I have fun with that. I when I'm writing books, I always call Peter and I go, hey, I have a real estate agent who's driving to see something and his car needs to be functional. He's proud of it, but he's kind of unduly proud of it. And it's 1986. What kind of car is it? And Peter can immediately go, okay, well, so, I mean, a Celica, actually, or whatever. So,
I love that. I love that research. And when I did Chill Out Tent on Boys and Girls in America about someone who goes to a festival tent with an OD of sorts, I called a friend who was a doctor and I said, what would happen? They said, well, they'd give you a bunch of saline and they would, activate a charcoal.
Yes.
And so I put that in the song, and actually, sometime later, we were playing a rock fest, and the doctor in charge of the tent came over and said, hey, that was really good. You got it right. I said, well, I did my research.
Man, it takes weeks to get the activated charcoal out of your nose. I got to tell you, they put it in me when I was 17, and it's so bad.
There's a memory. Speaking of memories, did you have a first musical memory, like the first time you became aware or liked music?
So no, I have early ones, but I don't have one that identifies itself as the first. I mean, I was around music my entire life, especially my first 5 years before the divorce. My father was a musician, so and one of his, I don't. It's hard to get a clear picture of like how this figured in his life, but at some point, I think as a side hustle or as a possibly thinking of future plans beyond grad school, he was selling records. And before, like, you know how distribution works in the record business, and it's a very regimented process, right? Like there's the way it used to be, especially in the 90s, it'd be a one stop, right? And that person gets all the stuff. But back in the 50s, you could buy records in bulk from whoever and then walk from record store to record store and go, hey, I got the new Glenn Miller, right? I got 10 of them. You want them? And they go, oh, cool. I was looking to get those. The chains weren't established. The record stores would be too new. So he did that, right? The reason I'm telling you this is because he only did it for a while. I never got much of the story from him, just much very late in his life. But there were all these old 7-inches in the garage, right, that were of music that he didn't care about, right? He was a jazz guy and a classical guy. But these were like Herman's Hermits and the New Christie Minstrels. So actually, this must have been late. It must have been mid-60s and not 50s. New Christie Minstrels, Herman's Hermits. What's that? Mary Hopkins, who was on Apple Records, right? Those were the days. Those are 3 that I remember finding in the garage sometime before I'm 5, or maybe when I'm 5, right? And being excited, I'd found these records I didn't know anything about, and then I would go and play them in my room on the room stereo. And probably the earliest playing records memory that I have is me explaining to myself how fade outs worked, right? Because I didn't have any data, right? I knew nothing, and I believed I can't have been older than 4. I don't know that I actually believed this, but I imagined that the people lived in the grooves, right? And that they were waiting to play the song. And you put the needle down and they play, and then they have to sing quieter and quieter toward the end of the song. And the amount of time I believed this was probably like under a week or something, but it's very vivid for me, like listening to it and going, oh, wow, they really have a lot of discipline. I mean, I wouldn't have used the word discipline, but it's like just marveling at their control to do it the same way every time.
There's a great Steve Selvage from The Hold Steady tells a story about being in the studio as a young guy, and they wanted it was something they were kind of trying to emulate, a Beastie Boys track, and they wanted it to go like next time, and fade out. And the sort of lazy engineer they were working with was like, why don't you just back up while you say that? Like back away from the mic. It's like that's not the same, man.
I like it.
Is this something you've said? Do you have periods of your life that you remember better than others?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of those things I was talking to you about. People who come from houses that are violent. The memory it functions weird, and you do get stuff that's vivid. And it's not the simple dynamic of erasing the stuff that was unpleasant. It's actually not that at all. It's very weird. I think for my purposes as a writer, it serves me really well because it lets me leap around a lot and make connections over weird spans of time. So I have vivid stretches, but often I'll find that I have remembered them in the wrong order. Or and the other thing I find is like remembering the sizes and dimensions of things. If you can go back and check on them later, I mean, this is a very simple thing, but if it happens to be childhood, you'll find that the place was probably a lot smaller than you thought it was, right? Considerably smaller. But on the other hand, like when I got into the building where I lived in Portland when I was 18 and 19, I was on a lot of drugs at this time. Not when I went back, obviously when I lived there. And my memory of the hallway, which if you'd asked me to describe it before going in, I was, I don't know, it's got a carpet, there's a payphone here, there's a laundry room over here. But like the scuff that was on my door that I myself left there, that was still there 25 years later, I remembered it the second I saw it. I said, oh yeah, I did that, and then I never did anything about it, and neither did anybody else.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I know, as a music fan, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but these are kind of questions I'm asking everyone. Seasons, I'm guessing you're like a lot of people that there are records or music that makes better sense in different times of the year. Do you have like fall records or winter records, summer records, or no?
I really don't. I listen to music constantly. I'm more open to this idea than I used to be. I used to have a sort of a snobby attitude, like no, that's a marketing device. But now I kind of like for one thing, it's like I have children, so when Christmas music starts to play and the kids get happy about it, I just love that. It's like it's really exciting, it's really fun. The one thing I do think, and I think it just might be because of the way that, not marketing, but sort of presentation, in autumn, atmospheric metal like Agalic or like Unwound, who's not really metal, not Unwound. Sorry, I used to call Unwound Diswound. I thought that was a funny name. You get it, right? So,
I get it. Yeah.
Diswound, but Unwound's leaves turn inside you, right? That now obviously it says leaves turn, so it sort of gets you an autumnal feel. But that's good autumnal music. A lot of the '90s Midwestern instrumental post rock type stuff. To me, when the seasons begin to turn, that music sounds really good, except for Don Cab. Don Cab seems obviously like summer music to me, right? When it's all hot and fast with the polyrhythms and stuff like that. That's summery to me. And the other thing is like War. I mean, they have a song called Summer, but all their stuff is summer music, right? Everything War ever did, from Lowrider to Summer to Cisco Kid, those are all like unimpeachable summer jams to me.
And that makes sense to me. I mean, one of the things in the summer, when it's hot here in New York, Electric Miles to me makes a lot of, and there's some of that polyrhythms.
Jack Johnson,
Yeah, and On the Corner, all that sounds really good in the summer. But I have like imprinted things when the record came out and I bought it that can kind of, The Replacement's Let It Be is the one that really, I like, that was the first record I was waiting for it to come out, and it was in October. And so but some others are like when you first heard them, or just when it makes sense.
It's funny. Is that the Replacements album that has Black Diamond on it?
Yeah.
So I first heard that one in a record store that December, and it was wet in Southern California. So to me, it's a very wintry record because I remember it was damp and dank, and I wasn't really down with a lot of that. The compulsion to like the Replacements felt so strong that I was resisting it a lot. But I remember hearing Black Diamond and going, this is kind of great. They're covering a Kiss tune. This is amazing. And it felt, and the way they do it is sort of so. It feels like a cellar. It has a sort of wet and drippy feelings.
Yeah. I remember when I heard that cover, I was getting into punk and whatever you called indie rock, college rock at the time, but I was still a closet Kiss fan, and I felt a little bit vindicated when I saw that they did that, and that it was okay to have these things, which I absolutely believe. It's
funny, because I didn't really like Kiss, but I have always been a great defender of Black Diamond. I think that's a cool song. It's like, I'll still defend it.
I always say, Kiss, say what you will about them, but it's the only band without any bad songs.
That's a fantastic line.
Yeah,
because we actually have. I wonder if I can read it to you. In my band, we think about Kiss almost constantly, and it's really quite remarkable. And we did a worst of Kiss playlist. We were hanging around backstage in New Haven. Let's see, do I still have it or did I delete it? I would not be terribly surprised. But it was like Worcester is like the best for that. for it had
She's So European has to be on there.
She's So European was absolutely on there. I can't find it anymore.
Shandy, maybe, I don't know.
God, what was on there? I mean, a lot of Gene's. What's the one that has the line? You ask me what hotel I stay in. One of the best.
Is that Great Expectations or something?
It might be. Great Expectations is terrible.
Yeah. So when I came up with the idea of this podcast, and thinking a lot about memory and wanting to talk to people, I got your book Devil House in the mail, and I read it, and I thought this is actually really, to me, lines up with a lot of things I was thinking. But I wanted to start in talking about Devil House. Did you have any like hometown crime stories that captured your heart and mind when you were young that you became obsessed with in some way?
So I talk about these in part 7 because the narrator of part 7 is me. And I mention two things that were both things I heard about. And one, and this is sort of a big punchline in the book, was the Mean Man, right? Now, the Mean Man didn't do anything. It was just a person's house, right? One of my friends told me not to step on that guy's lawn. That's the Mean Man, right? And in my mind, a whole mythos grew up around him, And why is he mean? Why does he have a horseshoe in his window, right? Because I didn't know anything about that. And he had a sign that said Lucky Lager, which is a type of beer, but I didn't know what it meant. So now I could read. I was a really good young reader, and those are words I don't understand. Anything I didn't understand, that's frightening to me. And so that's the first one. But then this is a funny one I didn't talk about. So my parents divorced. We moved across town, which is to say like 2 miles, right? It seemed like a world away, right? And but I was still going to Catholic school. and now I had to take a bus there, right? Because life had changed. And so I'm catching the bus, and we had to change buses. And this is the craziest thing to me. Or maybe my mom would drop me off at this other bus stop. I don't remember entirely. But there was an old California house. I mean, like a 19th century, there's this sort of Gothic style with sort of turret-like second floor stuff. Looks like something off the prairie, right? You know, it was near the bus stop, but it now abutted like a parking lot of an early 1971 strip mall or something like that. And it was dusty looking and empty, you know. And some older kid, to me, he seemed like a teenager, but he was probably like 10. I was like, "You ever go up there?" I said, "No." I said, "Yeah, I don't." You know, because there's guys who live in there, right? And they will. And the reason I remember this is because it was the first time I had heard this particular bad word. I didn't know what it meant, except that I did the second he said it. He said, "If you go in there, they'll grab a hold of you and stick your dick up your nose."
Nice.
Now, I didn't know what a dick was. I was like, what is he even talking? But I do know what you're talking about. You could only mean one thing, right? And so, and the first thing I was like, why would they, I mean, in my young mind, the second you tell me something's going to happen, my first question is like, well, why is someone doing that? I need to know what their motivation is, you know? And like, it was a very important question to me as a child. I think that's Catholic school working, right? It's like, I need to know what their goal is. But this was a chaos presentation of like some people who live in an abandoned house whose sole thing is to inflict some sort of weird physical thing on you. And then in a sort of classic of my mom, when I went home, I said, "Hey, this guy said not to go in the house because what house are you talking about? This gray house, the one." "Oh, no, the League of Women Voters has their bake sale there every year. It's fine." You know, and I say, "Oh, yeah." She said, "But what did he say?" And I told her, and my mom immediately starts going, "Well, I don't know how they would do that." Right, and starting to speculate on how it would be achievable. So those are the first sort of mythos ones, and then the next two are my friend Darla when we moved to Milpitas, who loved to tell stories about some house down the block where something horrible and violent happened. And I remember her insisting when after she told two or three, I said, like, you know, that's impossible. There's no way that could be. She said, "No, all my stories are true," and she was vehement about it, right? And I was like, I really liked her. I was like, "Oh, you wouldn't even say that if that wasn't true." And it was quite curious. But I think the first one I ever actually heard about actually happening would have had to have been either The Son of Sam or Carol Chessman, who had an Alan Alda movie, right? You remember, called Kill Me If You Can?
I don't remember that, Carol Chessman.
Carol Chessman was the red light bandit, I think was his name. And he would put a red light in the back of his car and pretend to be a cop and then pull women over and rape and murder them. But his was the case that ended the death penalty in California. I don't know if they ever did bring it back, but I think they did kill him. But yeah, so I remember that one a lot.
Yeah, when I was a kid in 1985, a woman named Christine Kreitz was killed in Martin Luther King Park. She was involved in a gang thing. She was 16. They thought she snitched on them, and they executed her. And they did it in this up against this tennis center that my mom played tennis at. It wasn't that close to my house, but it was in South Minneapolis, so I drove by there a lot, and I became fascinated with it. And I read every piece of paper, you know, every article in the paper about it. And I followed it, and the trials coming up. And it was the first crime I remember being obsessed with. Years later, I got to know the David Carr, the reporter for the New York Times.
Oh, yeah.
And we had dinner one night, and I brought it up, and he said, "You know, I was the guy at the Twin Cities Reader that reported on all that." And
wow.
And he followed up by sending me a package of Xerox of all the clippings. And it was like the best present I ever got, you know? It
yeah,
was like,
seriously, that's incredible.
and like I thought about, you know, being in it, you know, being sort of obsessive about these small crimes when I read, not small crimes, but local crimes when I read this book.
Yeah.
And, you know, it seems like the book's, you know, it's an investigation into what really happened, sort of, you know, what was generally understood versus what was generally understood to happen. I was thinking about legends and memorials a lot, and the dead and departed are often aggrandized, whitewashed, etc. Their faults are overlooked in the favor of their accomplishments. It seems to me that in your songs and in this book, you often do the opposite. You say, like, okay, you've read the headlines, but here's the humans here. And,
yes, I think that is what I do.
And is that a Christian instinct, do you think?
100%. It's like, I mean, the thing is, I don't think you have to be Christian to think that. I think it's a also a rational position. I think it's if you want to contrast Christian positions with rational positions, which I think is fair. But I think, yeah, one of the best scriptures is there is none righteous, no, not one, right? And most people don't really believe that one. That's the hardest one for most people. They think, well, there's none righteous, but this guy's pretty great, right? And well, actually, you have to cure yourself of all the great man, the perfect guy theories of humanity to really go in on it. And people really struggle with this to this day. It's like, it's funny, when you're very young, you often like to say like somebody is literally a perfect human being or whatever. It's such a bad habit to get into, right? But you do, and you're exaggerating, but I think the rhetorical habits you adopt wind up informing the way you think. But it's a Christian instinct for me, but I think also, it's also a communist instinct. It's like, if you are a good communist, you don't believe in hero worship. Hero worship, it runs counter to any, and when I say a good communist, I mean, I'm proceeding for the assumption that we all agree that, like even the hardest right person has to agree, look, if you concede all the following possibilities and we have a society where all share equally, that would be ideal, right? I mean, like you have to be an Ayn Rand objectivist to go, nope, the person who is the most successful deserves the most money. Okay, fine, if that's your position, but I think most of us think it would be great if everybody had as much as they needed, right? And in that way of thinking, the first thing you have to do is stop lionizing men, right? You have to stop saying, well, this guy was a greater man than these other guys, right? It's like, because otherwise you're going to wind up saying that guy deserves to live in a nicer house. So I do think for me it's a Christian instinct, but I think it's bigger than that. I'll say that I am informed in my belief that all people are of the exact same value, right? By my Christian thinking, but I don't think that's a necessary qualification for that thought.
Absolutely. No, I was thinking when I was started writing this out, and do you know that there's a Todd Snyder song? I don't know if you've listened to him, but there's a song called Just Like Old Times. And it's a story about how he meets up with this woman he used to know, and she's now a prostitute. And they have a party in a hotel room, and eventually the cop comes in and says, hey, you're in here, and we know her, and she's a prostitute. And he says, I'm sure she is, but that's not all she is. And I thought,
that's good.
Like that's the whole thing in some way. That's part of what we're saying, because it seems like
that's right.
You're not excusing them for their actions necessarily. You're saying there's just more to them, or yes, they did this, but understand how maybe they got there.
Yeah, I mean that's what a big question we confront a lot is like, what are the things that people can do where you say, well, no matter who you are also the person who did this, right? It's like I think most of us who well, I'm certain that anybody with a Catholic upbringing goes, yeah, no matter how good I do now, I'm still the guy who fucked up here, And so I have that. I think, but the thing is, like in the 80s, people talked a lot about toxic shame and stuff like that. But I'm very glad to be able to remember myself at my worst, even when it plagues me. I think, well, but remember, what you need to be better than. Remember that what you're capable of if you are not careful, and I think those things are important and good to know your own complexity, both for the better and for the worse, a little bit.
There was this there was that book where the author rode around with David Foster Wallace, and he was kind of riffing in the car. I forget what it's called now. They made a movie of it. He says at the end, the trick is to live yourself that you would just the smallest, purest little baby. And I was like, I loved that when I read it, and then I started thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know, like. Is that healthy? Is that entirely healthy? Well, like maybe I should remember some of the times I fucked up.
Oh, they're good for you. I think when you take communion, you're not supposed to do so if you are conscious of grave sin, right? And so I think that it's so basic. Like in order to commune with God, you need to somehow have expiated yourself of your sins. I mean, it's a memory process, So yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like in my childhood in the 80s, there was kind of a sense of omerta against the parents,
Yes, yes.
I don't have kids, so I don't know if that's still the case. I sort of suspect it's a little different, but even in like 80s movies like E.T. or Goonies, something happens and the kids are like, well, the first thing is we can't tell the parents,
Yes,
like,
that's right.
And I feel like some you've all occupied the space somewhat in this book and in some of your songs too. Oftentimes it seems to me in your work, like in some of it, the adults have failed the kids. Do you agree?
So it's funny, that's been pointed out to me. It's never what I'm driving at, but people notice it, right? People say, oh, wow, there's a lot of younger people in your books. And it's true. I mean, there's other people I'm not setting out to tell that story, but I do think it's fundamental to me, both, you know, because it's something you experience so profoundly, especially if you were coming up in that early post-punk era. You were inheriting the hippie countercultural mistrust of parents, but you had your own considerably, I think, more aggro take on that, right? It was not just mistrust, but rage, you know, and it wasn't just that they were clued out, it was that they were the problem. And there's the fact that I then worked on the other side of that. As a nurse, I worked on an adolescent unit, a children's unit, right? I was the guy who needed to prove himself worthy of trust, right? And I could see, and these were kids who had every good reason not to trust adults. And that's the thing. I mean, I think that's what informs it more than having been an adolescent is like, I have seen just how badly so many adults abuse the trust that children can't help but have in them, right? And it is natural and healthy and good that children trust the adults in their lives. It's literally instinctive, right? And when you abuse that trust, you hurt them, right, in a very real way. Whether that abuse is seismic or minor, in lying to them, about stuff, it messes with their brains, with their health, and I saw it over and over and over again. And I'm on their side. It's like, I'm like, those are the people that I'm always thinking of. A lot of my stories are rooted sometimes in those worlds, and I'm wanting, should any of the kids I used to take care of ever run across this stuff, I want them to go, hey, John got it a little bit, still kind of square, but he got it, So
yeah, I mean, I think that one of your most beloved songs, or at least one of the beloved songs, is the death metal band from Denton,
yes.
And that's almost telling the kids' version of it. Like I'm sure there's an authorities version of it that has a lot of files on a desk.
Well, that's the second half the second half of Master of Reality, where it's like the Black Sabbath book is. I mean, I try and show a little complexity. Most people who read that just go, "I hate Gary." I'm like, yeah, no, and you're right, but at the same time, what do you expect Gary to do in his position? It's like I hope that it's a little complex.
How does all this relate? Like all this. How does being a parent sort of relate to this? Change this? Influence it?
I really don't. It's really not for me to say. One thing, I'm not super reflective as I go on stuff like that. I'm always sort of just acting on what seems best to me at the moment. But also the house that I live in now and that we are building as a family is virgin soil for me. I haven't lived in a house like this, so I don't really know what it's like. I know that that like my children learn to trust that I will be coming home over and over and over again, right? I think that's kind of great, actually. Even though it's very painful to be on tour and it's very hard. My wife is struggling. We don't have family around, so when I'm gone, it's just her, So, and that's really super hard. But my children, in the meantime, I think are growing to understand something about consistency that was not present in my life, right? And so that's the stuff that I am doing. I mean, with parenting. The meditative space of parenting is that there's no such thing as a perfect parent, right? There's a book actually that people recommend called A Good Enough Parent, because that's what you're trying to do. You're just trying to do good enough, right? In that way, it's the same as making music. You are not going to write Mahler's Ninth Symphony. You can't, right? He already did it, and if you try, you will fail. But you want to make a record that's good enough that people can take something from it, and that's what you're doing. And maybe do a little better than good enough sometimes. That's great, And so, and that's exactly what parenting is like. Do they have food? Are they, are they protected? Are they safe? Do they feel that they can trust the house they live in to provide them with all things they need? Then you're there, right? Then you aim for higher always. But that's really all you can ask. And I think people get lost and confused when they start aiming for perfect because again, there's that bumper sticker. If you feel perfect, try walking on water, right?
Yeah, as I've been having these conversations about memory, I sort of realized that. Family, I mean, genetics, but also family is its own kind of memory, right? We pass these things down and folklore, family lore, etc., and traditions and whatnot. But it's just how we're passing things down is a big part of memory, and not just in, the records we remember, etc.
So on that subject, there's a couple of books that you really should order today, because this is utterly germane to what you're doing. One is called Kin, Kin. And it's by Miljenko Jurgovic, Jergovich is Jergovic, and it's published by Archipelago, who is a translation house. They're amazing. It's like 1,000 pages long, and when you look at it, you'll go, oh, "This is daunting," but it's just a pleasure to read. It will not actually. It'll take you a month, right? If you're a fast reader, less than that, but it'll take a month. But it's literally about familial memory, right? He's tracing his entire family. He's Croatian, but even to say that you're Croatian is to place yourself in a very specific terrain of memory, because Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia and that whole region, I forget what it was called prior to any of that, but he goes into all that. A lot of that has to do with constructing family memory, and family memory kind of supersedes all the other memories. Kin is an amazing book. And there's a book by Stepanova called In Memory of Memory. It's from New Directions. And that one's a little denser. And Kin is just a pleasure to read. You can't believe how good it is. It's just great. And Stepanova is a little thornier in its essays, but it's specifically also about memory and the Soviet Union.
Awesome. The actual, in the Devil House, the actual structure. It's part of your story, the house.
Yes,
which
that's
is,
right.
It's a soda fountain, then it's a newsstand, then it's a porn store. So he's tracing, the real estate records and the local newspaper articles about it, and trying to figure out, which is really cool. Part I really loved, and trying to figure out what this was, and then he moves into it. But I kept thinking, well, going from a soda fountain to a newsstand to a porn store is a downward trajectory, most likely. And I'm wondering,
depending on where you stand.
Is that part of the story?
Sort of. I mean, the thing is, but I talk about the house being restored to its proper estate, and its proper estate is when it's exalted by the kids, right?
Sure.
When they decorate it, and it's horrific to anybody from the outside. But when you understand what they're doing as their own artistic expression, right, as they're writing and they're painting and all that stuff. One of my favorite scenes in the book is when Derek shows up the morning after Seth has been up all night doing it, right? And Seth says, "What do you think?" And he's afraid Derek might be mad, and Derek says, "Wow, you guys really did it. This is amazing," right? I love this moment, right? Because it's like, it is punk rock. It's like back in 83, 84, you could hear, like when the Bad Brains did their crossover turn, what was that record called? Quickness, right? And people hear, go, "God, it's beautiful," right? Now, people who hadn't grown up with that fast music, had been into it, would say, well, beautiful is not the kind of word we use to describe this. But if you listen to doom metal, like, oh, this is a gorgeous record. It's rich and it's lush. Most people who don't listen to that kind of music would go, "What are you making a joke?" Like if you're listening to, I don't know, who's not Dissection, but like an ever-flowing stream is the album I'm thinking of. But these Finnish death metal guitar tones that are these incredibly crunchy, slow things, and they're beautiful to me. Once you're inside the vocabulary of it, it's absolutely beautiful. The same as, oh man, like if you see any pictures of old hardcore shows like 80, 81, and there's some guy and he's visibly 16 and he's shirtless and he's in midair and he's going to land on the audience, and your heart swells for the beauty of it, right? Whereas I think most people who aren't from that scene would go, "This just looks like a mess. He's going to fall. It's going to hurt." And you go, "Well, to me, it's beautiful," And that moment in that book, I think, is one of those. The place has been raised to a very high estate from the right perspective, and from other perspectives, it looks like a bunch of porn that's been made even more unseemly. And so, but it really is. It's all a matter of perspective there. And I mean, I think that's kind of an obvious point, but it's also true that, like, you could always find the cliche that speaks to the point you're trying to make. One man's trash is another man's treasure, or something like that. But it's really profoundly true, that like what is beautiful to somebody depends on what their experience of that thing is.
Well, I mean, it's a great thing for me to bring up, because I think, in that moment they found safety in that house, freedom.
That's right.
All artistic expression. It's for a few days. It's utopian, and
right, that's right.
And so you bring this up because I actually just got the Glenn Friedman. There's a new photo book he took, a Black Flag, and Black Flag photos, and I love the photos where they're not that punk yet, not just the band, but the audience. And a lot of people are wearing short hair and kind of white shirts, but there's no mohawks, and it's hardcore, but they're sort of still figuring out what it's going to be.
Magic moment in music, a very magical time when the audience doesn't know exactly what they are.
Yeah, and I look at that and I find a lot of beauty in it, and that is a good transition because I wanted to ask you. You've got a new album coming out, and the first song, "Training Montage," which I love so much.
Thank you.
I was thinking about a particular. It reminded me of something, maybe not what you'd think. It reminded me of the Cro-Mags song "Survival of the Streets," which says,
The best compliment I will be paid this year.
"Living inside enclosed walls, got no money in my pockets, no pictures on the walls. Wake up with a gun on my head. That's the life I've led. What can I do? Life's hard, so I got to be hard too." And so, I guess my question is, do you think this is your age of coral?
So it's a very funny question to me because do you know where the title "Age of Quarrel" comes from?
Is it not the Krishna Bible?
Yup, it's the Bhagavad Gita, right?
Right.
And I was really into that from about 96 to 99 ish, right? Like the Krishnas, ISKCON catered my wedding. And we distributed prasadam. That's what you call giving food to somebody that's been offered to Krishna, that it becomes Krishna, right? So then, and this is one of my favorite things about that religion. Then, if I give you this food, and we were talking about this earlier, when you take communion, if you take communion without discerning the Lord in the host, there's a saying in the teaching that you are then eating it to your own damnation, right? You should not eat it unless you believe it is God, right?
Okay.
And if you do so, then you don't get the benefit of communion. You get nothing. You have to believe it to receive it. In ISKCON, that's not true. I can offer food to God. God transforms it. It becomes God, and I can feed it to you, and you get the spiritual benefit whether you believe it or not. Doesn't matter, right? You might not get as much as I do if I believe and have done the offering, but I always thought that's a very great teaching, right? It's truer than communion. Like, it's good. Now God is available to everybody who believes or not, or doesn't believe. I love this. So, but anyway, Age of Quarrel is from that. And this is like a world I've spent so long in. I was super into it. And I actually saw Ray Cappo give a reading. We were in the same bill in Holland, in The Hague, in like 99, right?
Wow, cool.
And I've been looking, trying to get the poem he read. I even wrote to him at one point about it. I didn't get a response. Ray, if you're listening, you read a poem called "Turn It Around." I have wanted to hear this poem for over a decade, for 20 years now. I've been looking for "Turn It Around." But yeah, so I wasn't, is this my age of quarrel? Yes, emphatically yes. This is that record, and it will have that kind of impact on the scene, generally speaking, especially in the Lower East Side. I don't think you're going to be able to live without this record. Honestly, you will have no street credential without it.
In 1980, I guess it was 86, the Cro-Mags came to Minneapolis opening for GBH, and, not to be all grandpa's 80s, but before the internet, things kind of didn't come to, you kind of had to see them with your own eyes. And so I'm sure people in New York knew about the Cro-Mags for a long time, but they came to Minneapolis and literally changed the scene. People shaved their heads, it was like, I want to be that guy.
Yeah, the Exploited coming to Southern California did that. When the Exploited came to Southern California, absolutely everybody got their minds blown. And the same thing happened, I think, actually with GBH. But then the big thing that happened in SoCal in the punk story was when Discharge came, it was at peak, like every SoCal punk was united in their love of Discharge, right? And Discharge comes through on Grave New World, and the punks went insane. It was like, there was one of the two shows that you could hear tape of these shows, like, what are you guys doing? You're ruining it.
That was I've never understood if that was confrontational or if that's just what they wanted to do, but it was ill-received.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, you listen to it now, and I think if he hadn't changed the way he sang, this is one of those cases where he's audibly trying to sound like somebody he thinks sounds cool, right? Mm-hmm. But whoever that person was, he's not getting there. And he sounds kind of like the singer from Sirathangol, which is not somebody the punks were going to be down with in those days.
The record kind of deals with action films, which are their own genre, legends, etc. What's your relationship with these movies?
So my sort of trajectory is, for most of my very young life, I kind of wanted to be a snob, right? Even though I loved monster movies as a kid. But by the time I'm 12 and 13, I'm the kind of guy who wants to be reading stuff that's a few years ahead of everybody else. I don't want to like the same movies other people like. And I don't, right? I like either cheap horror movies, but I'm 14. It's either foreign movies, right? Or classy stuff, whether that's, auteur stuff from the 70s. In the 80s had a bunch of that, Scorsese, whatever. But I mean, I also had a taste for trash cinema, for the stuff that everybody else would consider bad. I always liked that, But action movies were not on my radar until my friend Joel when we were having sort of one of those really magical periods of late youth, 19, 20, 21, working jobs for 8 hours a day, but then having 8 more hours to just do whatever, it's like, and not, just nothing going on. In Southern California, weather's always nice. And Joel would like stop by and go, "You want to go see what's playing at the Dollar Theater? Yeah, let's go." And Joel wasn't like my style would be, let's look at all the names of the movies and figure out which one would be the good. And Joel would be like, Band of the Hand. Let's see Band of the Hand,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like he was just not. It was like, the point is getting into the movie, and if it sucks, then it sucks, and we have that experience. If it's good, then it's good. We have that experience, So I wound up seeing some action stuff with Joel. I don't even remember which ones particularly, but I started thinking, oh, these are actually more fun than I think they are. Then the VCR was in ascent, right? It was like this 86, 87, 88. Renting movies is a big thing, and I got it in my head to watch all of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies just as a thing, because at that time, I also had found that if I had a movie that wasn't, Kurosawa or whatever playing, and I got an idea for a song, I could just start plucking something out, pause the movie, write and record the song, the version that's going to get released if it's Early Mountain Goats, right? And then start the movie back up, right? Sometimes I would even use a phrase from the movie as like a sample, on the tape. And action movies were perfect for that, especially karate movies, any of that kind of stuff. So I found them like sort of comfort food, and I also I was always intrigued by a lot of them try to take place in a very clear moral universe, but they're actually abhorrent, they're actually like the morals closely is like Death Wish, right? Bronson's Death Wish. The first one I think is clearly you're supposed to think this guy is becoming the monster he seeks to destroy. Old story. But the rest of the Death Wish movies are just like, just violence porn. It's like, oh yeah, he's here now, and he's going to be even worse to the people who are bad than they would be to him, right? And now they'll get what they have coming. Will he be happy? No, he's Charles Bronson. He can't even look happy. It's not in his skill set, right? So I got very, very, very into those. And then when I wrote this record, I hadn't, everybody I knew was binge watching stuff during the pandemic, during lockdown. And I just never watch stuff anymore. I buy DVDs or Blu-rays and I forget to watch them. I read books, I do music. Like those are my main things. And like November rolled around, I was like, I was telling myself, you need to watch some movies. You will enjoy them and it will give you the relaxation you're not getting from your other pursuits. So when I turned on Netflix or whatever it was, I was like, find the action movies. You'll finish them. Instead of, if I start watching a serious movie and I get a little tired, I'll pick it up tomorrow. And I never do, right? But I started watching like, Mel Gibson, I think, is a monster, but his movie, what was it called? Blood Father, I think. I think that's the name of it. It was just fantastic. It's like, oh, I got to get it. I started watching these Indonesian action movies, which is the whole thing. And Ip Man is one of them. But if you look into the whole world of Indonesian action movies, they're remarkable. And I got super into them. And that's why I started going, kids go to bed, fire up an action movie, grab my guitar, and start writing the way that I used to write when I was like 24, right? Only now I'm a better songwriter, so I was able to go some more places with it.
Yeah. You've successfully made albums with like, kind of I'm thinking Beat the Champ, Goths, and League with Dragons, which approach the material from an angle, but the songs end up being so much more. Are these themes that reveal them something, or are they like a trick or a limitation you put on yourself to induce or produce creativity?
So I keep dropping the name of the Mother Church, but I think one of the big differences between Catholicism and Lutheranism and the Protestant thing is Catholics will tell you to your face that structure is great. It's great to have limits and boundaries, right? And to know what they are, right? Now, we know in art that one of the functions of a boundary is like when you transgress it, then it has meaning, right? Then when you choose to transgress the boundary, then you are making a choice that takes you someplace instead of just sort of mindlessly saying, I'm going to do the thing somebody told me not to do, right? In terms of making records and writing songs and everything, the reason I write in rhyme, the reason I like my rhymes to be perfect and not, I like to write crime with time, but I don't want to rhyme crime with I am or something, and I don't like it. It's like, I want the rhyme to be exact when it can be. I'm willing to fudge that when if the right word happens to not rhyme perfectly, but I like structure is the point of what I'm saying. I value structure, both because I think the more exact the structure, the more the space within it actually proves to be infinite, but it's infinite yet coherent, right? Whereas if you have infinity without boundaries around it, then it's not coherent. It's infinitely free, so it's got that going for it, But I am much more interested by the infinity that's present within boundaries, and for me, setting parameters to write within accomplishes that.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. I mean, it's whether it's about this or, I do that too. Or like, there 30 minutes. I'm going to write a song, and then I'm going to see where it's at. That's a boundary, right? And then you're like, is it any good? Do I throw it away or do I edit it? But 30 minutes, you got something.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really healthy way to write. Is like to say, what are the strictures? How am I going to do this? I mean, and then when you decide, well, I'm not doing any of that, I'm just doing a thing, then you're transgressing your own limit, right? That you set for yourself, and you go someplace cool.
Yeah. I had the one question that First Blood, which is obviously the Sylvester Stallone, John Rambo movie that you talk about on the record. As far as I can tell, it sort of dismantles a legend. John Rambo never went to Vietnam.
That's right. I suspect he actually did. The thing is, that's not actually true, the stuff I'm saying, but it's about, what I'm talking about is that, like, most of the action heroes, if you were actually present for their carnage, you wouldn't pump your fist, you wouldn't go, yeah, he's doing it. I fear that at the moment we're living in, maybe a lot of people would, right? But like, there used to be a take among opponents of the death penalty that all executions should be televised, because then people will all oppose the death penalty when they see how monstrous it is. I used to believe that, and I kind of don't now. It's like, I think people actually have really shown their asses, but the point is, like, Paul Kersey, the guy who Death Wish is based on, this is a vigilante. Vigilantism is not good. Vigilantism is absolutely morally abhorrent, and Rambo, going into Vietnam to appoint yourself judge, jury, and executioner of other people who are fighting for their country because your country happens to have invaded theirs, not cool. So,
right.
So all that stuff. So First Blood is kind of the most explicitly, it's the one that tells you how to take a lot of the other stuff on the album, because the rest of the album is a pretty unabashed celebration of violence, right? So,
right.
But do I celebrate violence? No, obviously that's myth, right? I think it's fine to tell those stories. I think once you start taking the stories to sort of as ethical imperatives, you run into some trouble, and that's what First Blood is doing. It also is loosely based on Bertha with the Grateful Dead.
One of my favorite Grateful Dead song.
I love it, and the riff is, or the rhythm is dump dump da. It's similar. It's a little lot faster.
I think the tempo of that song when the Dead do that, it's oftentimes it's the one of the more upbeat songs in the set, and I always just really love that.
Yeah, no, I'm very fond of 73 is sort of my sweet spot for the Dead. It's like I like it when the country impulse and the psychedelic impulse are like right on the same page, but they're not quite getting into the 70s quite deep enough. When they're doing Me and My Uncle, Bertha, I Got to Get Back, what's that one? Cumberland Blues, right? All those are my favorite zones.
I was when First Blood, definitely, like I kept just picturing a guy with Soldier of Fortune magazine, which, remember, people used to bring that into junior high, and obviously people who had not fought in any wars at 13 years old. But look what I got. I got one more. I want to tell you before I go. The record's amazing, and
thank you.
There seems to be even more electric guitars on this record. Is that you?
I play a lot of them. Alicia, who produced it, plays on most of the songs too, and she's an electric guitarist. Matt's main instrument, everybody thinks it's the sax, but actually guitar, I think, it was his main thing in college, and he's a music grad. So like main thing, it means that like he's really good at it. So him and Alicia were playing together all the time. I play electric. God, I think a lot of the time it's me doing electric on First Blood. It's me doing electric on Hostages, on Need More Bandages, on Extraction Point, which I think is maybe the best song I've ever written. One thing I did was I bought this Les Paul copy. It's a Greco that Brian May apparently played one of these in the 70s. It was his guitar for a while was this Greco, this Les Paul copy. I get big crushes on instruments like that, right? On cheap early 80s, late 70s shredders, copies and stuff. I have a ton of them. Like that's I'm not quite a collector, but I buy them when I see them. Cool. And I got this Greco, and it sounded so good. It sounded very silkwormy, and I wanted that vibe, Speaking of people who tell stories, I mean, Silkworm songs always tell an interesting story that they force you to piece together yourself in a really great way.
Yeah, I will say that Extraction Point is amazing. Guys on Every Corner.
Thanks.
When you said a robust East Bay delegation into a sax solo, I got out of my chair and pumped my fist.
Well, thank you. I mean, you got to take partial credit because a robust East Bay delegation could have leapt out of a lifter puller. So it's like that's a phrasing I don't think I get to without a long tenure as a Craig Finn fan.
Last question. Do you think about legacy, like how you'll be remembered, or you just show up and go to work?
I try not to. I don't. I think it's gauche to think about that stuff. And also I don't think it matters. And I think that any attempt to control it is vain. You will be remembered probably for the work you do, right? Unless you do some serious monster stuff, and then you get to be remembered for your monster stuff. But the monster in the bad sense of monster, because I think monsters are great. But otherwise, it's literally just going to be your work. It's going to be if you get remembered at all, which eventually none of us will be, right? And I'm always thinking a long view. We talk about memories, like oblivion has a real appeal to me. That 4,000 years from now, I guarantee nobody remembers what I did, right? And in that sense, it makes it more important now. This is the moment that stuff might matter in, right? And this moment may be a 30-year moment. It might be 30 years from now, something I did still finds purchase somewhere. But that's still now in the long term. I'm still working in the present. But I try not to think about where I'm, about who my peers might have been in the past or anything, or who they are. I mean, sometimes, I think in terms of who's working in my rough neighborhood. I think that about that, like you, Bill Callahan, Christine Fellows. I try and think of those names just to get a sense of what we're all doing and maybe what tradition we're in. But as far as like posterity, I try very hard not to think about posterity because I do think that it's rude.
That sounds like a nice treat to live on to me. With those as my neighbors. That's a beautiful answer, actually. I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for being a part of this, John. I really appreciate you taking the time. So there we go. As promised, a great visit from the legendary John Darnielle. It's always a pleasure to hang with him and listen to his thoughts on everything. I have to bring up that I think we both meant the Bad Brains Eye Against Eye album rather than the Quickness album when we were talking about that. My bad, I didn't catch it at the time. I do hope that Ray Cappo might come forward with the name of that poem he read at The Hague and where we might find it for John's sake. Also, thanks to Dadgrass for the sponsorship. Head up dadgrass.com and use discount code FINN for 20% off. And especially thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. I'm having a blast talking to all these amazing people. I'll be on tour supporting the Legacy of Rentals record in the fall in the UK, Europe, and the US of A. Hit up craigfinn.net for details and tickets. I'd love to see you in person and maybe talk about some of this stuff. And please keep listening, subscribe, and stay tuned for more great guests on That's How I Remember It. Stay positive.